Well, hello everybody. My name's Dino and this is Dino's Tinker Shed. Now, one of the things that bothers me about my stock Suzuki DR650 mirrors is they are a little bit too narrow for me when I'm riding on the road. Now, I don't have terribly wide shoulders, but by the time I get a coat on, these mirrors really only show me a little bit, and I'm constantly doing one of these to see what's behind me. Now, there are great aftermarket choices to solve this. There are really good trail mirrors that you can buy that actually flip inside when you're off-road and protect the mirrors, but actually give you a much wider field of view when you're riding on the road. But those are fairly expensive. They're around $80 US to get a set of those. Now, there is a homebrew solution that I've seen, and today I'm going to try to make. And this is what it looks like. It is a mirror extension. So this fits in between your mirror and this little stick out, and adds about 3 inches of length to these stems here, pushing the mirrors out a little bit wider and ultimately giving you a better commanding view of the road as you ride along. Now, there are obviously some disadvantages to this particular unit. It does make your mirrors wider, and it's a rigid mount. So if you do happen to hit some shrubs or brush off-road, well, it's either going to send you for a loop or it's going to damage the mirror or the mount itself. So that is something to keep in mind. But for me, these only cost about $5 each to make at the most. And I can unthread these if I know that I'm going to be on the trail for a long time and the trail's fairly narrow. I can just unthread the mirror, throw it into my back bag there, my back box, and off I go. Everything's nice. So that little bit of inconvenience for me is worth saving quite a bit of money. So today, I'm going to walk you through how to make a set of these for your DR650 with simple hand tools. The only tool that maybe a lot of people don't have is a small welder like I have, but you can get by just with some Loctite instead of welding. And you'd also need a small tap. So you need a 10 by 125 millimeter tap so that you can thread the inside of this pipe. The rest of the materials are pretty relatively available at your local home center, and you too can make a set of these and give yourself a little bit better view of the road. So with that, let's get to work. All right, so here is what we are going to be making. This little extension that's about 3 inches long that fits in between the mirror and the mount on the levers. But what is this? How did I make this? It looks simple enough, and believe me, it is really simple. So this portion here is simply a 1/4 by 4 inch black steel nipple that I just cut the threads off of. I file the ends and then thread the insides to accept the M10 by 125 thread. I get that from this bolt. So this threaded stud here is actually just a bolt that I cut the threads off of, and basically I welded inside, but you could use Loctite if you don't have a welder. And then this is simply just a nut that I've drilled out the center so it'll fit over top of the outside diameter of the black pipe, and I've just tack welded it into place. And all this is for is just to give me a little bit more leverage to snug this down onto the bike. You really don't need this. And that's why I'm saying you don't really need a welder if you just want to make a simple extension. That's the way Carl's are on his bike. So this is a very simple project, but I'm going to show you how to do it and how it looks, and we'll get to work right now. So if we look at the pipe nipple itself to start with, there's a few things that we have to figure out. Number one is you can leave the threads on, but I just don't like the look of it, so I'm going to cut these off with a grinder. And then I'm, like I said, going to surface that. Now the next thing that I want to show you, and I'm going to see here, it's maybe a little bit difficult to see, but I can show you right there. So see that lump in the middle? The thing about these black pipe nipples is they're actually a welded pipe. So there is a seam that runs right along here where the pipe's actually welded. I'll try to get another better view there. There we go. So we need to grind that down, or when we go to tap that, it makes it a little bit more difficult for you to tap it, and it's not a very smooth thing. So I am going to cut these off, and then I'm going to use a Dremel tool to grind that burr out on the inside, and that'll be the first step done. So let's get to work on that. So in order to cut the threaded ends off of this black pipe nipple, I'm going to first put it in my vise, and then I'm going to use this cutoff wheel on my grinder. Now I don't like little offcuts floating around on the floor, so oftentimes I'll just stop a little bit before it gets all the way through, and then I'll just sort of grab the piece and put it safely up on the steel portion of my toolbox here. And I'll just flip this over, and I'll do the same thing on the other side of the pipe nipple. It's really quite easy to do. Now the key to getting this thing to work right is to make sure that these cut ends are square and flat to the rest of the pipe. So to do that, I'm going to actually use this small file, and I just work my way back and forth all the way around the cut end using my eye until I get it as reasonably flat as I can get it. This isn't too bad here. Next, I'm going to use this chamfering tool to chamfer the inside of the pipe, and this helps when we get to the tapping process. The tap starts easier and it just looks a little more professional. So you can still see that welded seam now inside the pipe, and we need to remove that. So I'm going to use a couple different things here. I think I'll start with a chainsaw file, and I'll just sort of rock it back and forth almost a little bit on an angle here to try and get that welded seam as flat as I can. It's tricky, it's not the easiest, and this file is a little bit smaller than I would like. Once I get it reasonably good, I'll follow it up with my Dremel tool and a grinding stone. Now this stone's a little bit soft for what I'm doing here, but it's all I had that would fit inside. So I just keep polishing and grinding, and I'm just gonna sort of follow this up with the chainsaw file where there's a couple pieces that are in a little bit too far for me to get with the grinding disc or the grindstone here. But you can see how much crap came off that grinding stone. It really is quite nasty. The next thing we're going to do is actually tap both ends of this pipe now that we've got it cleaned up. Now we're going to do this with an M10 by 125 metric tap and a tap wrench. Now this matches the same thread pattern that's in the handlebar levers so that we can actually thread this in and make the extension. So I don't tap a lot, but I do know that this hole is a little bit sloppy, and that's why the tap kind of goes in a little bit on an angle here. And that welded seam that we ground down still does offer a little bit of problems because it's a little bit different hardness to the rest of the pipe. Now, when you're tapping, I use two hands like this to try and keep it as straight as possible. I back it out every few turns and add a little bit of 3-in-1, or if you have it, cutting fluid, until finally you get it to the desired depth and you can back the tap out. You can see all the cutting chips here. I'm just going to clean these up with a little bit of compressed air. And when I'm fully done with this, I'll clean it up with a little bit of brake cleaner as well, just to get all the contaminants out. But it looks pretty good overall. And I'll just try it here with this bolt. Seems to thread in pretty well. The next step is to be able to secure the threads into the actual tube itself. So to do that, I'm going to plug weld the threads in place. So first I'm going to take the bolt back out because I'm going to drill a hole through the tube where we can plug weld So the first step is to file a flat spot approximately where I want the hole to be. So this is going to do two things. It's going to allow me to center punch it, and it's also going to create a flat area so when I weld it, it's not going to be above the actual tube diameter. I'll be able to grind it down smooth and it should look good. So I'm just going to strike a center point here. It's a little hard when it's in the clamped in the jaws like this. It tends to move. And then I'm just going to take a drill bit, whatever size it is, I can't remember here, as soon as I can get it started in the hole here, just enough that I can drill a hole. I think this was about a 1/4 inch drill bit. It might have been a little bit smaller than that, maybe 3/16, something like that. But I'm going to drill right through, and this will provide access to the bolt threads inside. And you're going to see that right here. As I thread the bolt back in, I'm going to advance the threads just to the inside of that hole like that. Now when I weld inside that hole, the puddle will be contained, it'll lock the threads in place, and I'll be able to grind off the remaining weld to make the actual tube look nice and smooth. Now again, this is a really cheap welder. You can still buy these at Harbor Freight for around $139 American, but for our Canadian friends here, you can buy a very similar 120 volt welder from Canadian Tire, and they come on sale for a couple $100. So I'm just going to circle the inside of the hole here and plug weld this. And this way it means the shoulder's nice and square still. You can see that. I think this weld turned out pretty good for a cheesy welder. I don't know if the welder's cheesy or I'm cheesy, but I think it turned out pretty good. Now that things have cooled down, I'm going to cut the bolt off right where the threads begin so that we ended up with a threaded shaft coming out of the pipe. So I'm going to return to my grinder here, and I'm just going to try to cut this off as square as I possibly can. It's very difficult to do freehand, but I'm going to give it my best shot here. And now I'm going to dress the end of the bolt and grind off that welding slag that you could see. It's a little bit hard to tell here because I didn't want to get the camera too close because of all the grinding dust and that, but I think overall it looks pretty good. The shoulder's square. The threads are a little bit crooked, but overall it's good. Let's try this out. Okay, so let's try a dry fit with the extension that we've made so far. It starts by taking out the mirror and then threading in the extension. Now it's a little bit tough here because the threads on the very end are still not quite formed right, but we get it. And it finally goes in all the way down to the shoulder. Now again, you could actually leave it exactly the way it is here. This is how Carl's are on his bike, and he just tightens them in with a small pipe wrench when he wants to put them in or out. And then all you do is thread in the mirror to the top, and you can see what a difference this makes in terms of distance out from the center of the bike. Now we could again leave them just like this, but I'm going to take it one step further and use this nut and weld it halfway up so you can tighten on and off when you need it. Now the first step to drill the nut is to actually measure the outside diameter of the pipe. And what I do is I basically just lock the verniers here to get a reference to make sure I have enough meat to drill the nut out. And in this case, I do. So I don't have the right size drill or twist drill here, but this 9/16 twist drill is close enough. It's a little bit bigger than it needs to be, but I think I can make up the difference with welding. Now, if you've ever had to drill a nut or a washer, it is hard. It wants to spin, the drill bit bites quite a bit. This is a grade 5 nut, so it drills not too bad, but it is still a real challenge. Just take your time. I try to keep the drill as straight as possible, but eventually it does get stuck. I work my way out, and eventually I can ream the hole a little bit here. And I'll test it just to make sure, and you'll see that it is quite sloppy when the tube actually gets inserted here. Look, take a look here. Now, in order to be consistent, I'm going to use this other nut as a stopper underneath the jaws of the vise. This will ensure that both the left and right side extension have the nut placed at the same height. So I basically set the post down on the nut, and then the nut that I want to weld is the exact same space as the other one. You can kind of see it here how this works. And then I'm just going to go ahead and tack weld this nut in place on the tube in about 4 or 5 different spots. I'm just going to rotate it here to make the welding process a little easier for me. And one final tack. This looks pretty good. I think I'll let it cool overnight and then come back to it. I left this overnight just to cool down. So I'm just going to clean all of this welding splatter up and prep this thing so that I can paint it. Overall, I think it looks pretty good. Okay, so here is the end result, and I think it looks okay. The threads are nice and clean, and again, you could Loctite these in instead of welding them the way that I did. The threads inside aren't bad. Again, the hole inside of this threaded pipe is a little bigger than it needs to be to put a proper M10 thread in there, but overall I think it will work fine for the application that we're using. So let's put this all together. Well, these are looking pretty good. I'm just going to adjust them in the shop here, and I can already tell that I can see better. But the real test is to get them out on the road and see how they perform. So let's do that now. Wow, what a great day to be riding. Now right off the bat, I can notice how clear and wide I can see in behind me as I'm riding. And at lower speeds like this, around 60 kilometers an hour, the mirrors are nice and rock solid. There's no problem here. So I thought I'd give them a test off-road, or at least on gravel roads, and this is really what I ride a lot of. I'm not a big enduro rider, and I found they worked really, really well. Now, one thing I did like about these is when you stand up in the saddle, because the mirror itself is pushed out and up a bit, there just seems to be a little more room for your hands to articulate without hitting the mirror itself, something I did notice before the mirror extensions were installed. And I think they look pretty good, and for the style of riding that I do, they seem to function very, very effectively. Now, after I got done playing in the mud here a little bit, I thought it might be best to try these on the highway and see how they perform at highway speeds, things above 100 kilometers an hour. My biggest concern here is because these stick higher and out further, they may add some leverage to the bars and make the bars shake a little bit, and I didn't really notice that. If anything, the camera had a bit of a hard time at these speeds. Now, even coming by this large truck here, which everyone knows can be a big problem with buffeting, the mirrors didn't really have much of a problem at all, and I was able to quite quickly and easily get by this truck without any major problems. It was pretty good. Now, the one thing I did notice is trying to get through my gate was a little bit challenging. Normally I can just zip right through here, but now there's just barely any room at all. Okay. Let me get this thing parked, and I'll give you my final thoughts on these mirrors that we've made. And that about wraps up this project today on the DR650. I hope you enjoyed these inexpensive mirror extensions that we built today, and if you like them, you can always try to make them yourself. Now, again, you could probably make these without a welder simply by Loctiting that bolt in at the bottom with some red Loctite to tighten it right up. And all you really need then is a tap set, and in fact, you could probably just get by with a single tap and a tap wrench to make this happen. So, although these aren't the end-all be-all of mirror extensions, I think they're functional, and they do help people like myself that are maybe a little bit wider up at the top and can't see around themselves on the highway. And the fact that they're easy enough to take off with a 14mm wrench, I think it makes sense for off-road riding as well. So, until next time, I'm Dino for Dino's Tinker Shed. You have yourself a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye now.